All right. Thank you, Sarah. Hello, everyone. Good afternoon from wherever you are, up and down the west coast of Turtle Island, I expect. I really appreciate the chance to come talk to you today. I really love Tacoma Tree Foundation and their mission, and I'm really appreciative and grateful for the chance to share what I know and what I'm continuing to learn about this tree. So I'm wearing, a bunch of hats today. I am the co-creator of the Arbutus Army, which really is carried out in partnership with Washington State University Extension Plant Pathology Program. However, we don't really endeavor to hold it really tight. We don't really want to centralize it. We don't want to be the center of its world. We really hope to, just contribute and tell people more about the tree so we can help with its resurgence. So no doubt that these trees in general are sacred and they provide, essential services, especially during this time that we're living in through the pandemic. Sarah acknowledged that we're broadcasting on Puyallup territory right now. And I also want to I think I'm obligated to tell you that not only are we in Coast Salish territory, but really the Arbutus, we endeavor to work across the range of this tree, which starts in what is now British Columbia and extends all the way down into Baja, we think. So the tree, there's lots of people throughout deep time who have interacted with the species and continue to steward the species. And really, we want to just pay our respects to those folks who have were the original stewards of the earth, and then continue to and they have rights to their culture and to this to the tree. And we really just want to build our relationships really respectively moving forward. So, and we do, I think you did answer a question about where your Wi-Fi is tuning in from. We really entertain you now if you'd like to, in the chat somewhere to acknowledge or tell us whose land you're on right now. And I use this very great website, it says nativeland.ca, to find out kind of where you are if you don't know already. So there, kind of going back starting with a little bit of history and context about the tree. There is other names for it, and I haven't said, I don't know if I've said the name yet, but there were names going back into time memorial. So there is, and I just want to highlight there's numerous ones. So, and I just want to highlight a few. One was from the Wasanich peoples, where they live in currently is in British Columbia. And, not only is it important to know whose land we're on, but the origin story of those folks, right? So, and there is the tree stands out very prominently in the origin story of the Sanish people, or often it's termed the Wasanich people, and figures pretty prominently in their origin story of, and I'd seen this on several websites, and it took me a bit to actually find it on their tribe's website, which is I've linked to down at the bottom. But I recall I actually found this. I read about this quite a bit in the Pojar McKinnon. I think you all. I know there's a lot of plant geeks out there. You probably have it within reach. If you don't, you might be freaking out a little bit, like you lost your keys or your wallet. But it is on that story is recounted in the at the bottom of on the Arbutus page 49. So it talks about this in the Saanich story that that the survivors of the Great Flood actually were able to tie a cedar rope to the tree that was an arbutus tree at the top of what we call Mount Newton right today. And so, yeah, it's very rare. I think the only origin story that I know that kind of figures the arbutus in there. So, and then there's also the southern Lushootseed name. So in the area that we are in the southern Puget Sound, and I'm going to attempt to say it, but it's Kukulchets, right? So, and it's so I think it's important to know that there were names, and I'm going to go into the settler colonial history of the tree right now, but I just want to acknowledge that it is played very prominently in people's lives for quite a while. So, in European terms, Europeans came upon the tree in the late 1700s, and largely, I think many of you probably know this already, but it's in this Ericaceae family, and so that's the heath family, and then the genus is Arbutus, and the etymology of Arbutus actually is Latin for the term arbor. So I figure this genus has played such an important role in history that it, even stemming from Latin, it like is the essence of tree, right, for arbor. So the lineage of Arbutus actually includes 14 species of flowering shrubs and trees, such as the strawberry tree, or otherwise known as Madrone, or into Ireland. So so the strawberry tree, this Arbutus unito, which is very common to our landscapes, like it grows very well in Mediterranean climates, and you're probably familiar with it. It looks very similar to Madrone. It is found in like Southern Europe, and actually there's scattered populations into Ireland. So my name is Michael Yadrick, right? My last name actually comes from the Balkans. So I don't know, I've spun this myth or story in my head recently that like perhaps, and actually my ancestry is broadly European and Irish too. So I kind of spun this story recently that my ancestors perhaps could have interacted with strawberry tree, back in the day. And it is, so important too that this El Oso y el Madroño, the statue, it sits in the Puerta del Sol. I think it's this plaza somewhere in Madrid, and it's actually on the Madrid city crest, dating back to the year 1212, like 1212. So we have this, long history with Arbutus, which I feel like is fairly significant, and really, so it's no doubt that when the first note of Madrone in North America came from missionary Juan Crespi during the Portola expedition in 1769, 1770 in the Californias. So they named it according to what it looked like. And so I guess he was pretty right on, because it's Arbutus. And then and then the Menziesii comes from Archibald Menzies, who basically sailed along with George Vancouver into Puget Sound, and he, I assume, collected it, but it was first named by Frederick Persch in the 1814 work, which is called A Systematic Arrangement and Description of the Plants in North America, right? So that's all the history of it. So as far as name, and this is a lot of this information is on the Arbutus Army website, so arbutusarmy.org, and you can find that in the page called Madrone 101. So I just want to tell you that we're sort of all inclusive here. I know there's actually quite a difference in the naming. So I will say Madrone. You can say Madronio, Madrona, which took me a long time to get used to. Our neighbors north of the border into Canada generally refer to it as Arbutus. But it is found up and down the jagged edge of North America. And then there are these scattered populations really into into San Diego County, and maybe perhaps into Mexico. I'm not really sure. But these remnant or kind of scattered populations are fairly disconnected. I think you can all see my big cursor here. It's kind of overlapping with Tijuana. This middle map comes from the California Native Plant Society. It's pretty awesome. There's actually, and then there's populations and forest types up in actually the Sierra Nevada in very high elevations away from saltwater. And then this Treesnap map, I'll tell you a little bit more about this this app that we're using to actually collect, using our phones to collect GPS information, location, and health information about trees wherever we find them. So the other thing, there's other arbutus in North America, and I think perhaps just really quickly, this Arbutus Arizonica. I think, I don't know, my love has grown really for Arbutus, and I really sort of endeavor to learn more about them. But there is this Arbutus Arizonica. So, back in the day, it could have overlapped with the southern range of the Arbutus menziesii. And, it looks very similar. They all look fairly similar and all have a lot of same traits, that they have like peely bark, kind of red to green to yellow. And then they have these like evergreen leaves with these like lanceolate to elliptical shaped leaves. They're all fairly similar. Right. So the gifts that, culturally, the tree is very important. And these are some of the gifts that the tree has provided and continues to provide. And I've highlighted some of those right now in red that you'll see. So from the bark, and these are available, a lot of this list is available on the North American Ethnobotany database. It's pretty incredible if you go and check it out for pretty much, I don't know, it gives me hits for just about any species that I put in there. But so for the bark of Arbutus menziesii, we know that we can create furniture with it. There's very much like these days, like a boutique market for like flooring and tables and things like that. But if anybody knows anything about Madrone, it's that, and I've known this from like an early, as a kid, like splitting wood in the backyard, and my stepdad telling me that, like, yeah, Madrone wood burns long, it burns hot. So in my mind, it just gives me just makes me feel cool, great, warm inside, that peat has been keeping people warm for centuries, right? It's also important for wildlife. So bees are the primary pollinator on these white urn-shaped flowers that pop out in April-ish, depending on the range. The berries, I would encourage you to eat them. It's maybe an acquired taste. I will tell you that this webinar is for entertainment purposes only, so it's not meant to like cure anything you have, but as a preventative measure, perhaps. Like, it's good. So not only are these berries for birds to disseminate to, but people can eat them as well, and they make a pretty tasty beverage, fermented beverage, I hear, as well. The other thing about the twigs is that, back in the day, before we shopped on Amazon, you could make toys or dolls like out of the twigs, or fish hooks, whatnot. And then out of the leaves, there's uses for the leaves as well. And most recently, from foraged and found edibles, like in Georgetown, I found a good tea made out of the leaves. So, like I said, people have had history, interactions with the tree for eons. And so, despite this relationship that we've had that people have had with the tree since time immemorial, there are these myths about the tree that occur in pretty much anything you read about the tree. So, and some of those myths, and these are like ripe, like as an ecologist and a restorationist, like it's like it's basically like a challenge. I was like, this cannot be, but they're kind of self-reinforcing, and they're almost like conversation killers. Like, people often say, like, the tree is very beautiful, but it's just bound to die, bound to fail, and like that's the end of the conversation. The other myth is that it's hard to grow, which has some truth to it, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. The other one is that it's fragile and it's dying, and I'll refute that as well. The other thing is, like, you observe but you don't touch it. If you touch it, it'll get sick. If you touch it, it'll fall down. And most recently, I started to hear this one just about substituting it. So like not even considering it as an option in our landscape anymore. And we should start to substitute it with things that are that can functionally replace it. So that is hard for me to handle, probably for the 142 of you out there as well. You probably want Madrone in our future. Like since we have such a deep past with it, I think we want it into our future as well. So again, these myths, it's popped. I follow the Madrone news. I have this little Google alert that pops up every few days. It's with a lot of BS, but the past couple, this news that's come out in the past couple of weeks. So the largest Madrone in Washington that was up in Port Angeles finally failed essentially, and it was cut down. So on the left, it's referred to as Ted's tree. Yeah, these guys cut it down. Yeah, from these cross sections of wood, you can actually see like it doesn't look too bad, like not a lot of rot like in the wood. However, from some of the more aerial images of the architecture of the tree, you could see there were no leaves on the tree, and it's sort of been each branch had been sort of dying back over the years, and so we knew it was in rough shape. And this is a Madrone of significant size. Oftentimes they do not grow to this stature, and so this one was like old, right? So because usually it is like a subdominant tree, it's reliant on fire, so oftentimes they don't make it to this size. Yeah, and then this other one too, news out of Oak Harbor is that they're getting a bigger McDonald's, right? However, this woman somehow got the attention of the Whidbey News Times, and this story about the tree is about Madrone. Because of building codes, regardless of whether or not McDonald's wants to like reconfigure their drive-through or whatever, they can't because of certain codes and lack of protection for the tree, right? Too in the municipality. So, but again, in these stories, those myths surface like about this tree is beautiful, it's very important, but it's sick. And for whatever reason, like regardless of the story, there's always these myths about the tree. So what's incredible about the tree, and regardless of whether or not we see kind of sick populations, disease, and pathogens affecting the tree, it does contain, because we do see them growing in very tough conditions. Like you may have been on visually looking at land from the waters. If you're out on the water, you see them growing out of cliffs, see them growing out of gravel. So the incredible thing that gives, and I think all the ericaceous plants, that gives them this ability to access or to survive on the edge of the Western world, really, is that the widespreading root system is associated with ericoid mycorrhiza, right? So I think there's this hub of fungal diversity underground. Even though we mostly interact with the tree above ground, underground, there's so much stuff going on. And if you all have dug into any of Susan Samard's work from British Columbia, like trees interact and talk and share resources underground. So this fungus in particular is characterized by these coils. So right down here, these coils that form in the epidermal cells of the fine hair roots of ericaceous species. So the fungi colonize the root cells and establish hyphal networks around the roots, providing increased water and nutrient absorption, while the plant in turn provides the fungus with carbohydrates through photosynthesis, right? So we kind of know about mycorrhizal associations with a lot of trees, but ericoid I think are very specific for ericaceous plants. So yeah, so I think this is one of the biggest reasons why Madrone has the ability to persist through drought and thrive in really harsh conditions. And so also there's been some study about about the Madrone soil community and its links to nearby Douglas fir that may assist with disease resistance in the tree. So I'm really big on this concept of emergence, right? So very complex outcomes come from very simple interactions, right? So, and just like in nature, like we see in nature, my hope is too that our networks, like the Arbutus Army network too, will act like this, and in that way we can thrive by mimicking nature. So here's a little bit about the Arbutus Army. We celebrate everything Pacific Madrone, and we like to highlight conservation and restoration efforts about the tree, and to connect people along the way. So these are principally what we focus on is the education, conservation, and connection. I've just highlighted a few things about how you can dial in and get tuned into what we're doing. One is just to look for us on social media or look for the website, and you can find out more about the tree. We try to educate specifically about Madrone and its importance, some of its downfalls, and then so yeah, that's a good way to find us. And we've done, in-person workshops. Obviously, this last year we've turned to doing more virtual conversations. But then conservation wise, I will talk more specifically about Treesnap and your ability to contribute to this community-based science effort that we've got going on. And the other thing is just connecting people, because like I said, we do have this hope that we're going to become this range-wide network at some point in time and contribute to the resurgence of the tree. So the one thing we've done very recently was we had a meeting, and I'm going to show you some of the results of like some of the latest and greatest Madrone science out right now. But the other thing is we just created this listserv so people can just like chatter online, like any listserv. And when I find stories about a McDonald's going up in Oak Harbor, like I can tell everyone about it. So yeah, so one thing that came out of our meeting, so Yannicka Peterson, who's a teacher and creator of a syllabi, actually came up with, there is this syllabus available that walks teachers and students through um, how to grow a big old Madrone tree from a very little seed. And so this is something that's available. It's pretty much like it's sitting there. It's a resource that's available. There's lots of potential energy associated with it, but it's really like unfunded at this time. But it's really incredible. This is just one of these things like connecting people. There's all this expertise out there in the world, and she just popped up on our radar fairly recently. I think it's something we should take advantage of if someone wants to utilize it. The other thing, there was a study came out, I think early last year, was out of these folks in Santa Cruz. So they studied Pacific Madrone and Coast Live Oak through the droughts in the early 2010s in California, and really what we know already really is that Arbutus menziesii is drought resistant. It doesn't handle extremes, like doesn't handle super cold weather, like cold extremes, and doesn't handle like really intense hot conditions, right? But it is a climate change winner, I believe. And so, and her team, Yarmila Pitterman and her folks down at UC Santa Cruz went through and actually discussed the importance, the mechanisms behind why these guys are survivors, right? So, one of it is like its deep roots. Depending on the substrate that's growing on, sometimes it can form really deep roots to access that moisture that's available. The other thing is that it has this diffuse porous vessel structure, right? So these small but diameter vessels which convey water up the tree, but so they're small but very dense, right? And there's these small conduits that really confer this like embolism resistance, so, and this hydraulic safety margin, which they discussed in the paper. But yeah, amazing things. The other thing was they talked about this other life history trait, which is drought deciduousness, which is and we get calls about this, not calls, no one calls me, emails about this all the time, that in the summertime the madrone in our yards, they start to, the leaves will start to turn yellow and they'll fall off. And it's like, is the tree dying? So yellow is fine. Yellow is somewhat normal for that tree to drop its leaves. However, the brown, the silvery leaves that we'll get into a little bit later, that's the danger. Brown is and brown leaves are death. So the other cool thing that's come up was when very active, and so grateful to Washington State University Extension for participating in this Rangewide Common Garden trial. So right now, there was actually one in the Bay Area which burned in a few years back in some wildfire. But right now, there are 4 Common Gardens trials going in like 3 different places. So at Sprague Orchard, Southern Oregon, Starker Forest in Willamette Valley, and then at Puyallup, so right down the road from me here. So, and there's this woman, Renata Polton Kamakura from Duke University, who is looking at growth and disease resistance essentially in these common garden studies. So what a common garden is, it's essentially they've taken like 140, 160 some odd seeds from different mother trees from up and down the range and planted them all into these rows essentially. Kind of like a farm, kind of like a Madrone farm. If you probably never, there's not too many of them, and then analyzing data from that's collected about their growth and what diseases show up. And really what we're showing in Puyallup is that the trees that are growing most robustly and that are showing less disease are the trees actually from the Willamette Valley area. So this sort of is heartening to show some, because there are diseases and pathogens that befall the tree. It is important to find something somehow through science, either indigenous science or Western science, that could actually provide a tree that has some disease resistance, or also with climate change adaptation. There's this thing called assisted gene flow, or essentially you can take seed from one spot and just move it up. So take Willamette Valley trees and bring them to Puget Sound, perhaps, and it would help to pre-adapt populations to the warming conditions that are expected mid-century to late century. So another thing with a warming world is that, this is a snapshot of forest fires back in September, August. I don't know, y'all remember, it's kind of like ancient history, right? But a few months ago, the West Coast was on fire. And if you see these little hot spots that show up here overlap with the Madrone range. So it will be interesting to see. And Madrone evolved with fire, and it has survived with fire. And there has been a policy of the state to dispossess indigenous peoples of their lands, of their cultures and their language and their practices, such as cultural burning and whatnot. So we've removed fire from the landscape, and we're kind of suffering the consequences in a warming world because of increased fuel loads, yada, yada, yada. We all know, I think some of us know the intricacies of that. But I think this is one of the coolest things about the tree. So before I leave you, if I could just tell you about Lignotubers. So this is something, so this is the best picture I can find. It's kind of hard to know what's going on here, but at the base of the stem, where the stem meets the ground, is this woody swelling at the root crown. So a more vague term is burl. I don't think it's exactly a burl, could be something different, but it can be more pronounced in some trees than others. This is very pronounced, right? So this portion of the tree contains these dormant buds that store carbohydrates and nutrients necessary for bud development that supports growth where new stems can sprout vegetatively. So this reproductive strategy has evolved in perennial shrubs, often from Mediterranean type ecosystems. So in this part I'm going to read, this thousands of meristemic foci may be present, similar to stem cells. Undifferentiated cells in tissue are capable of growing and changing into new shoots in response to fire or other damage. And this is what allows the trees to resprout or replace stems that have been lost. So essentially, maybe forever, who knows? Like, I don't know when's studied this, right? But what you can see here, this is a tree that I'm familiar with in Seward Park in Seattle. So you can see like there was like maybe perhaps a multi-stemmed madrone here. One stem failed, and what you're seeing is the outcome of that lignotuber activating, right? So it can resprout. Yeah, so tree, like I said, I don't think these trees are fragile at all. This is one growing out of a weird parking lot in a hospital in Lacey, Washington. There's this is at Swan Creek Park. I don't know how this happened, but this madrone ate this hose. I think this may have been a sort of impromptu rope swing or hose swing that was tied to the tree, but over time, someone left the hose and the madrone kept it. There's this one, yeah, growing over the railing. So if you leave something too close to a madrone for too long, it will keep it forever. So if you want your fence, yeah, put your fence a little bit further away. So again, like I think I've tried to impress upon you all that the tree is like amazing. It's not fragile. However, we know that there's dozens of diseases and pathogens which affect this tree. So either the stem, and I've sort of characterized them into how they affect different parts of the tree. So either on the stems, on the leaves, on the twigs, or down near the roots. And these are some common species and their indicators of really what they are, right? So I think a lot of us, I think the canker, like this sunken black area on the main stem of the tree, is fairly familiar to everyone, and you can really, you know it when you see it. I'll go back here for a second. I think I'm right on this, the difference between the leaf blight and the twig dieback. Like this is blight, which is very apparent right now because it's cold. Most of us are in very cold conditions. So you'll see this like browning of the leaves. However, in the spring, it'll pop up and look beautiful and totally normal. This one I think is alive and it's just blighted because you'll see actually what it appears to be flowers on it. However, if the symptom of twig dieback is actually this, where the whole twig or eventually the whole limb might die back, is this like silvery color to the leaves and then actually just like death to the twig. So I think the take-home message is really generally is that it needs to grow in certain conditions, right? So well-drained sites are surrounded by compatible vegetation. Douglas firs are its best buddy. Salal, ocean spray, evergreen huckleberry. So it can form those proper mycorrhizal associations, compacted sites, excessive irrigation, fertilization, pollution, or physical damage like backing your truck into the tree, hitting it with a weed whacker, are basically no-nos and will lead to decline of the tree. So like I said, the tree is drought tolerant, but I think more and more, and with extended drought and warming conditions around everywhere, essentially, we think like pretty much infrequent but deep watering can help. If it doesn't respond to that and it gets worse, you probably have a root rot problem. So one thing that people can do to help is you can get dialed in. Actually, you can ping us. But right now, if you all just want to take out if you're not already like on multiple devices, take out your mobile device. You go to or look for it in the store. You can download this app, and what it allows us to do when we do travel, you can see we're pretty Puget Sound centric, right? But we've been snapping trees up and down the range for a year and a half maybe now. There are some champions out there, and probably I hope folks that are tuning in, members of the Army that are have snapping a ton of trees. So really what it allows us to do is using the location services on the phone, it pinpoints that tree on the map, and then there's just a small like a handful of questions that you answer about the condition of that tree. And so we can build this long-term data set, which helps us actually decipher where exactly the tree is, because that range map I showed you at the very beginning is somewhat not correct, right? And the other thing it helps us do is to track condition of the trees in different over time and space. Yeah, so that's pretty much what I have for you is in regards to presentation. I'm willing to take some questions, but here's how you can find us. You can email us at this Gmail address or on social media, Arbutus Army. This hopefully if people miss this, Sarah's gonna record this, put it on YouTube, but also go on to Tree Hugger Pod at some point in time in the near future. And then I would just put one last thing, if I could prime you a little bit, is I love Tacoma Tree Foundation. I believe in its mission and its work in neighborhoods. We're pretty much known for working in neighborhoods around Tacoma, but sort of have ambition really to help cities outside into Greater Pierce County and Puget Sound